We are not going to solve hunger, in other words, by figuring out how, farmers can triple the amount of food they can get from an acre of land. We are going to solve hunger by really understanding more deeply why people in certain parts of the country or certain parts of the world are hungry and why others are well fed. And that's going to have a different answer depending on where you are in the world. I think about sitting here in the San Francisco Bay Area, home to billionaires, home to some of the richest people in the world, and yet I can walk out my door and walk 20 blocks from my house and see homeless, hungry people in the streets. That's a policy failure. It's not an agricultural failure. And so how you solve for that policy failure, again, it is going to be specific to your own country, your own community.
Hello there. Welcome to the Chakula podcast. I'm your host, Felicitas Mwalia. We bring to you all relevant issues and discussions about food in Kenya and beyond. We break down topics and dig deeper into day-to-day happenings in food and farming systems, giving our holistic view on the food we eat. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Chakula podcast. Today we are very lucky enough to be hosting Anna Lappé. She'll get a chance to introduce herself and share with us what she does. But the conversation today will be all about her debunking persistent myths about our food system and the structural causes of hunger and malnutrition. And she'll be able to share with us a global perspective. Global hunger is still rising and the world is still not on track to meet the 2030 zero hunger target of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. This is confirmed on the SOFI report. The number of people affected by hunger globally rose to as many as 828 million, an increase of about 46 million since 2020 and 150 million since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. Additionally, 3.1 billion people could not afford a healthy diet in 2020, up to 112 million from 2019, reflecting the effects of inflation in consumer food prices stemming from the economic impacts of COVID-19 pandemic and the measures put in place to contain it. Anna, thank you so much for joining me. I've shared the statistics and it would be very nice for you to share with us who Anna is, what is it that you do, and your take on the numbers.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for having me. As you said, my name is Anna Lappé. I am based in the San Francisco Bay Area in California. And for the past 2 decades or more, I have been working as a writer and advocate and increasingly as a funder working with philanthropy to really push forward a vision of a food system that is one that values the planet and people and all the birds and bees, and that produces enough food for all of us to eat, but while at the same time protects our ecosystems. And so when I hear those numbers about how many people still go hungry every year around the world and really sit with what it means, what those numbers mean in terms of lives impacted, families impacted, it's heartbreaking. And it's even more heartbreaking to me because we know that hunger is unnecessary.
Mm-hmm.
We know that the world produces more than enough food to feed every single man, woman, child, and more. And so we know today that there is more than enough food for us all to have enough. And yet it's true. There is rampant hunger around the world, and those numbers are increasing. And it's a reminder, as those figures always are, that when we talk about hunger, we really have to go to the root causes, and that it isn't about a scarcity of food. It's as my mother, Frances Moore Lappé, has been saying for 50 years, it is a scarcity of democracy. It's a scarcity of people really having power over what kind of food is being grown, who has access to it, what kind of resources people have to either grow their own food or pay for good, healthy, nutritious food. So those are the kinds of questions we should be talking about when we are trying to understand the roots of hunger.
Yeah, and basically, Anna, from where you sit, what is it that you guys are doing to challenge the current system?
So what really inspires me is to see the incredible social movements around the world that are showing in their own communities how you can have food systems that actually do address those root causes, that actually are supporting farmers to grow food in ways that doesn't damage soils, doesn't contribute to the climate crisis, that instead actually helps farmers be more resilient during the climate crises that we will face, and helps grow abundant food. And one of those social movements that gives me so much hope is the movement for agroecology, this way of farming, a practice, a science, and a movement that really is about ensuring that our food systems work for people and for the planet. And to me, seeing how much the movements for agroecology have grown over the past 2 decades is a huge source of inspiration.
Yeah, Anna, you mentioned that the current hunger we're facing, it's unnecessary and the world produces more than enough food for everyone to eat. And you also mentioned some of the structural and underlying causes. But I'm just thinking from the context which we operate on here in Kenya. Last year and this year, we've been having a famine, we've been having a drought. The number of hungry people has actually been rising, specifically in the ASAL regions. And my main question, and actually not even my main question, I know our listeners are actually asking themselves, isn't this also a problem that should be addressed?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, what you all are facing there is
Yeah, but
um,
but then how then do we
mhm.
address? Because when you talk about climate change, you find that whenever we talk about we are hungry because of climate change, there are always never solutions to address this. But how?
Yeah, it's a great question. And what I would say to that is that one of the ways that we need to be addressing what you're facing there is thinking about, long term, but also short term. So in terms of the long term, we know that globally the industrial food system contributes to almost a third, if not more, of global greenhouse gas emissions that are driving the climate crisis, making the kinds of droughts you're experiencing there worse than ever. And so we know that long term, we really need to be thinking about how do we get fossil fuels out of food? How do we reduce the use of petrochemicals like pesticides? How do we reduce the reliance on fossil fuel intensive synthetic fertilizer, certainly in the industrialized north where we produce so much crops to feed livestock or crops to feed corn-based ethanol, we need to rethink how we're using our farmland. But in the short term, we really need to be thinking about how governments in countries like yours, but how governments can incentivize and support farmers to start adapting to the kinds of climate shocks you're experiencing and
Mhm.
adopting farming practices that help to help farmers grow food in times of little water and help be more resistant to drought. And agronomists and those studying farming systems are showing us that these practices of agroecology, these practices where farmers really work with nature to deal with pests, they work with soil systems to create soils that really have healthy microorganisms and can store carbon and store water well, that these farming systems are in the short term. Right now, some of the farming systems that we can be incentivizing and supporting farmers to adopt to help them be more resilient during moments of drought.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because the government lifted the ban on GMOs I
Mm,
think last month, yeah, as a solution
mhm.
to the current hunger crisis. So when you talk about long-term solutions for them, it's not all about long-term solutions, but what can Kenyans? I don't know.
Yeah, I saw that news here, uh, and it reminds me that I think a lot of folks are still unclear about what are the real impacts of genetically modified organisms, and what can these seeds actually, what do they do? How do they work? And how to separate out what these seeds actually are from what the companies selling them tell us they can do and they will do and they are. Most of the genetically modified seeds commercialized in the world today are highly limited in terms of what they do for farmers. They're basically either seeds that have been engineered to resist herbicides, so toxic, in some cases highly toxic herbicides, or they've been engineered to express an insecticide. So they've been engineered so that they themselves kind of repel insects. And some seeds do both of those things. They both resist the spraying of an herbicide. So if you're a seed that has that trait, then if you get sprayed with an herbicide, you survive and the other crops in the field don't, or you express that insecticide. But these are traits that are very specific, and they are tied to the profit interests of the companies who sell them, because the companies who sell these seeds sell farmers at the same time the chemical herbicides and pesticides that are used in conjunction with these seeds. What we see from the evidence in the field about what seeds are best suited for farmers dealing with moments of environmental crises, these are biodiverse seeds, seeds that have been, shared and saved among farming communities that have adapted to local environments. And again, these genetically engineered seeds, they're not they're not locally specific. They are sold worldwide to again deliver to farmers these very, very specific traits that I would argue are not what farmers need right now.
Actually, quite interesting for you to share that with us, since you already have an experience. Do you work with farmers?
So yeah, I mean, as I said, I myself am not a farmer, but I through my work, both on the funding side and as a writer, connect with farmers and farming networks. I work for a foundation, and we have a grant making program that supports a range of organizations, mostly in the US, but some around the world, that are supporting advocates that are trying to speak out and educate policymakers and consumers about the impacts of some of the biggest food companies in the world, and also working with farming networks and farmers to help support those farmers that are trying to adapt more of these agroecological practices and help spread them to other farming communities, again, mostly in the US, but some around the world as well.
Yeah, but I'm just curious, Anna, in the US, how has the uptake of agroecology been taken?
What we see in this country is we have an agricultural system that heavily subsidizes commodity growers who have few options other than growing the kinds of genetically engineered seeds I just described. Most of the corn now grown in the United States, most of the soy now grown in the United States are genetically modified seeds and are grown with chemical pesticides and synthetic fertilizer. And uh, farmers who are growing these crops are heavily incentivized to grow as much as they can on as much of the land as possible. And in the US, the majority of the crops we grow are actually not going directly to feed people, but they're either going to industrial livestock operations or now to corn-based ethanol production. And so there is a voice among farming advocates and environmental advocates that have been trying to put pressure on our government to say, the system that you are subsidizing, it's not good for people. It's leaving many people in the US hungry. It's not good for the planet. The industrial animal agriculture operations that receive so many of these commodity crops, they're some of the biggest drivers of air pollution and water pollution in this country, not to mention the workplace abuses of meat processing plants. We're trying to say that we really need to fundamentally rethink what we incentivize growing in this country, and that would have benefits not just for the climate, but also for people's
Yeah.
health, and for workers and for farmers. And, when I talk with farmers, I remember, talking with a commodity grower here in the US, and he was sharing with me that, he was really sympathetic to those who are calling out the environmental and social impacts of this way of growing food. But he said, as a farmer here, it's so hard to transition. It's so hard to have the financial support to make any other choices. And so farmer advocates and others here in this country are working very hard to try to create policies that will help those farmers to transition, to think differently about how they're growing food and what they're growing.
Yeah, so basically the context is also a bit similar here. The government really doesn't support so much farmers who want to transition.
Yeah, I know it's many years ago that I
Mhm.
was in Kenya. My mother, Frances Moore Lappé, and I were reporting a book we wrote together called Hope's Edge. And each chapter was a story of a different place around the world where we found inspirational social movements really trying to get at these roots of hunger. And in Kenya, the story we told was the story of the Green Belt movement and Wangari Maathai.
Yeah.
And the reporting was about 20 or so years ago. I was there, but I'll never forget going to one of the communities where the Green Belt movement was organizing and talking with farmers in that community who were telling us, for years, the government had been really pushing their community to grow coffee for export.
Mm-hmm.
And they were explaining, they were growing coffee for export as they had been subsidized, encouraged, incentivized. And the year we were there, when they looked at the costs that this farmer was explaining, the costs that they had to spend on the seeds and the other inputs, the pesticides and the other things that they had to invest in to grow coffee and other crops for export. And when they took those costs into account and they looked at how much they were able to get from the middlemen who they were selling their products to for export, at the end of the day, they had very little money left over. And in the case of coffee, they said, with little money left over, it's not like we can eat coffee. How much they appreciated how the Green Belt movement and the farmer educators that were part of that movement have been training their community to invest time and resources into growing kitchen gardens. And they showed us these kitchen gardens that the community had started to grow thanks to this organic farming educator that had been working with them through
Mm-hmm.
the Greenbelt movement. And they were showing us how they were starting to grow food again, real food that they could eat. And so, despite how impacted they were by the terrible export markets, that they were able to have that local food security. And so, this is just a story that has always stayed with me of seeing, what that looks like on the ground when communities have that kind of training and education and encouragement to really focus on their own food sovereignty
Yeah.
and to realize the dangers of being tied to a global market, the dangers of being tied to a farming system where your input costs for pesticides and fertilizers can skyrocket from one year to the next. How important it is for farmers to have that kind of independence.
Actually, that's quite impressive. Where can we get the copy?
You should be able to find it. The title again is called Hope's Edge.
Hope's Age.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Anna, I want to take you back. You mentioned the quote by your mom where she talks about hunger is not a scarcity of food, but rather a scarcity of democracy. Is it possible for you to just expound more?
Sure. So I think this is such a profound idea. I think many of us, wherever we live, whatever privileges we have or don't have, we are acutely aware that there are hungry people in the world. And you shared at the top of our conversation just the scale of hunger. It is really important to remember that is needless hunger. Needless in the sense that there, as I said, there is enough food in the world, that fundamentally to have hunger in a world of abundance is a political crisis. And it's a crisis, therefore, that can only be solved through political action, through mobilization, through building power in communities. It is not it is not a technical problem. It's not an agricultural problem. We are not going to solve hunger, in other words, by figuring out how, farmers can triple the amount of food they can get from an acre of land. We are going to solve hunger by really understanding more deeply why people in certain parts of the country or certain parts of the world are hungry and why others are well fed. And that's going to have a different answer depending on where you are in the world. I think about sitting here in the San Francisco Bay Area, home to billionaires, home to some of the richest people in the world, and yet I can walk out my door and walk 20 blocks from my house and see homeless, hungry people in the streets. That's a policy failure. It's not an agricultural failure.
Yeah.
And so how you solve for that policy failure, again, it is going to be specific to your own country, your own community. How we solve for hunger here in the US might look different from how we solve for it elsewhere, but it looks the same in the sense that it looks like us looking at these political underpinnings, the democratic failures that have led to hunger in a world of plenty.
I really like what you said because it's what we've been trying to push at the Root to Food initiative and trying to say actually food is a political issue. And when you talk
Yes.
about hunger, it needs to be addressed but from a political aspect.
And I love that framing too, because
Mhm.
I think part of the tragedy of needless hunger is that individual families, even individual communities, feel a sense of it's an individual's fault
Yeah.
or it's failure of a community to solve this problem, when really the only way to solve these roots of hunger is collectively. The only way to solve these roots of hunger is at a much higher scale. And that's where the conversation needs to happen.
I'm just curious to learn more or basically to understand more when you say as collectives, yes, there's so much we can address the issue, but from a political aspect, but beyond that, how can we address the issue? As individuals, again, I as Feli or me as you as Anna, how do we try? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, from that political angle,
Maybe just to also add, because you find that the political process might be so slow, it takes a lot of time. At times, you might even want to give up because of the change. You're not seeing the change that you want to see. So, how do we then complement the political aspect?
right, right.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's two ways to answer that. First
Mhm.
is, yes, political change can be very long and tortuous and circuitous. But one of the things that I have seen real power around is the ability to make more change more immediately on the local level politically. So,
Mhm.
I'll give you the example again. I'm in the US, so my examples are coming from here. But there has been a movement around the country to address the fact that we have minimum wage laws in this country that are far below the cost of living. So you can make minimum wage in this country and still not afford to feed your family. Changing the national minimum wage is a decades long effort that has failed to achieve much change. We have seen incredible success of city governments changing the minimum wage laws in their communities so that people in communities across the country have seen minimum wage laws change so that there are now some places where people have minimum wages in communities that are living wages where you can afford to feed your family. So that's an example of a political change that if you bring it down to a more local level, you can see some achievements possible on the shorter time frame. The second way I'd answer that question is that while we are fighting for the big changes we know we need, whether that is around pushing for real action on climate, we know that if we don't address the climate change, hunger will increase because we will have real crises of production because of climate shocks. While we're waiting for that kind of and fighting for that kind of global change at the most intimate local levels, there are ways we can come together. Here in the US, we talk about what we call mutual aid, this idea of local communities developing ways to provide emergency food to the most needy in their communities, to encourage small-scale community gardens to provide accessible, healthy food in communities. Those are some of the ways that are community building, but not necessarily fighting for that big political change that we may not see in our lifetimes.
Thank you so much for joining me, Anna. Do you have any words that you want to say that you've not shared with us?
Thank you so much for having me. If folks want to learn more about some of the work that we support at the foundation and that I'm engaged in as a author, people can learn more at realfoodmedia.org and sign up for the listserv for that organization there. And I guess the final thing I would say, talking to you and thinking about my own experience in Nairobi,
Mm-hmm.
my own experience with Kenya, being in Kenya with Wangari Maathai, is thinking about the arc of her movement and her work and her life is honestly one of the biggest sources of inspiration for me. When we met Wangari
Mm-hmm.
was a little bit more than 20 years ago.
Yeah.
The movement had just lost its biggest donor. Their funding was, unclear. The organic farming educators and their networks were being threatened with arrest for teaching farmers organic farming. The political situation in Kenya
Interesting. So
was,
I didn't know about that, but interesting. Yeah.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. The political situation in Kenya, as you know well more than me, was highly unstable.
Yeah.
And, and and I remember as my mother and I uh, left Kenya, and were so touched by Wangari and meeting her family and connecting with the folks in her network. We were so concerned that the next we would hear from her is that everything had collapsed and that the movement had folded. And yet over the following few years, we heard that there was a change in leadership in the government,
Yes.
that her constituents encouraged her to run for a seat of parliament, that she did and that she won.
Yeah.
And then just a few years after that, she got that fateful phone call we all know she got, where she
Yeah.
was informed that she won the Nobel Peace Prize.
Mm-hmm.
And a friend of ours was with Wangari in the car when they got that phone call. And Wangari's first reaction, her first words upon hearing that she had won this incredible, incredible recognition, she said, "We won."
Wow.
Not I
Yeah.
won. It was about the we and the greater we. That is a profound story of who Wangari was and
Yeah.
how she built her movement and the work that she did in the world. And I think it is such a story for all of us. This is all about something so much bigger than any one of us. And we never know. We never know the impacts of the work that we have. And we never will, same with Wangari Maathai, she never could have dreamed how much her impact would grow in her lifetime. And so I think about that story in just having this conversation with you and think about the inspiration that Wangari's life represents.
What a good way to end the conversation. Very powerful. It's quite interesting. And thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Well, thank you again so much
Yeah.
for your work.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I really hope this is not the first and the last episode we've done together. I just hope we'll get to do more together. And I also hope we'll get a chance to do one with you and your mom.